All right. So recall back beginning of this year, again, you all submitted a list to county staff related to your initiatives for the upcoming year. This is sort of an ongoing process that we've used over time where President Vincent asks all members of council for their priorities and initiatives. Staff takes that list and then combines the information that we have and sort of puts it into this table that we highlighted back in March of this year to show you two sets of initiatives. The priority initiatives, which is the table column on the left, and that includes county code updates, Delaware code updates, DelDOT initiatives, and P&Z initiatives. That column could be best described as initiatives that came from more than one council member as your priorities for the county to be working on. On the right is the ongoing initiatives, which were items that were included on at least one person's submittal related to your priorities. Airport construction, broadband, business park expansion, Delaware State Police, EMS, fire and BLS support, and then land trust and open space acquisitions. So on the right, the ongoing initiatives could best be described as something that council's very familiar with, things we work on a monthly, yearly basis, things that get approved in the budget that staff are working on at your direction. I think what you really want to hear is what's happening on your priority initiatives. So we'll go through those, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'll focus in on the priority initiatives, starting with the county code updates. So on the list that was presented in March, we had specific code updates that we were working on, starting with the subdivision appeal timing ordinance. That was an ordinance that we changed the timing of the subdivision appeal, in essence gave the council more time to hear an appeal that came from a Planning and Zoning Commission decision. Solar farms, by the way, that ordinance has been heard and approved. Solar farms, creating guardrails for future solar farm ordinances that you see, making sure that those items of approval are similar, if not exact, every single application, so we have a standard. That ordinance has been introduced and approved. And then amenity standards, having standards set forth for all subdivisions, mostly involving the amenities such as the clubhouse, tot lot, swimming pool, landscaping. Those amenity standards have been introduced. Planning and Zoning has recommended approval, and you coincidentally hear that this afternoon in a public hearing. The other two ordinances that we are working on is master planning. That's been introduced. We have received a lot of recommendations from other entities, including Plus, DelDOT. We're probably going to have to reintroduce that to just show you the updates so that we can have a formalized ordinance that has that feedback baked into it. That's going to be ready in a matter of weeks to months to have reintroduced. And then through lots, that's sort of house cleaning for planning and zoning. That's ready for introduction as we speak. We've talked a little bit about the quality stormwater management. That's the idea that our county engineer Hans Medlars put forward on the banking program for us to have quality stormwater management banking. And we've worked quite a bit behind the scenes, staff level and our attorneys. We probably need to have further discussion and direction from council based on some of the information that we've gathered. So more to come on that item when it relates to the quality stormwater management banking. So the next priority on the list was Delaware code updates. Last week I presented the wrap-up for the General Assembly and the work that they did. One of those items was the reassessment. We worked with the General Assembly to make sure that the reassessment every 5 years was in a manner that the council or the county would be agreeable to. That sets a standard for all three counties to reassess it every 5 years. There are going to be additional updates on reassessment that I highlighted last week that we're going to work on in the next session specific to reassessment. There is a lot of stale language that we have worked on and shared with the other two counties to hopefully join forces with them to work on setting a standard statewide on reassessment, in particular the appeals process, which today is not followed.
Right. I imagine that's going to need to be clear because suspect we're going to be using it quite a bit.
I think you're right. I think that's probably the biggest unknown and maybe biggest fear, if you will, or trepidation is the appeal process coming out of our first reassessment ever.
Right.
How that unfolds and who those 5 volunteers are that sit through these appeals.
We may have to look at that too.
If in fact that's the
Is that going to be volunteers, or do you just got to appoint people?
we're recruit. We're recruit.
Can we introduce a draft?
Yeah. So stand by. A lot of that's going to come with the assistance of the other 2 counties, which you're familiar with our conversations there. Of course, DELDOT is always top of mind in our initiatives, and we highlighted that this is one of your initiatives every year. And back in March, we updated you that County Council is going to have an update directly from DELDOT. From that point moving forward, DELDOT has either appeared here or had numerous workshops in and around the county on some of these issues listed. And part of this update that they made to Council included these items: multimodal projects, the 2 TIDs, Henlopen being the one that's already created, and we are receiving funding through the Henlopen TID as we speak. The Roxana TID, which is still in the beginning stages of creation. The good news is DELDOT has worked on the district area of the TID, if you will. Our Planning and Zoning Office has worked on the forecast of the land use within that TID. We had an update call last week on that. We are going to very soon be ready to roll that out for your input.
This might not be a fair question, but with regard to the Henlopen TID, do you have any opinion on how successful it is to date?
So it's doing exactly what it purported to do: collect funding for projects inside the TID. But I think we all would agree that the speed in which DELDOT can see construction projects unfold from that, we wish could happen sooner. And that's just the nature of DELDOT's process. So it is collecting the money. The money will be there when the projects come online. It's just a matter of all of us want to see the projects being built. So the good news is the money's being held and collected. Perhaps the part we hope would improve is the speed in which DELDOT could see these construction projects through. There are some very large projects within the Henlopen TID, including, for instance, in my estimation, one of the first new roads to be built in Sussex County ever in the last 3 decades, perhaps, is the Mulberry Knoll Extension, which will connect 24 with Route 9. It grew out of the 5 Points Initiative to create more interconnectivity between these major routes and a grid system in eastern Sussex County. When that comes online, part of the funding will be from the Henlopen TID.
Yeah, I recall the secretary when she was here saying that you're getting complaints right now about the lack of infrastructure and construction. Soon you'll have complaints about all the orange cones around. And her words were right on.
Yeah. If you drive around the 5 Points area and you see the new roundabout that's being built, experience the improvements along 24, whether it be near Plantations Road or all the way down near Long Neck Road, the improvements are great. It just took a long time to get there, and we're hoping that DELDOT continues all their efforts to construct those improvements along the way. A big issue that they worked on here recently is the Coastal Corridor Study and the SR1 corridor capacity study. You mentioned orange cones. There is $4.45 billion to be spent over the next 6 years, $1.37 billion in Sussex County. That's the CTP program, which is the real construction projects that we see coming out of the county and DELDOT's efforts. And then we're developing the next CTP, which is the 25 to 30.
Should we remind anybody that might be listening today that they can have input into that?
Correct. We received numerous recommendations that have been vetted by DELDOT. They're now taking those projects and running them through their formula to see if it makes sense from the funding standpoint as well as the other elements that they study, including road safety, economic development, project movement. So we will get that list sometime this fall. And then last, during, I believe it was Ms. Hastings that came down, she provided specific road construction projects updates here in Sussex County. So a lot going on in the DelDOT world, and that's part of your initiative that you would hope to see through. And then last is the planning and zoning initiatives. And again, at the same day I rolled out the council initiatives, we followed that with a presentation on specific planning and zoning initiatives. And we discussed certain things that we called development design, which eventually could work through the process and become ordinances that are considered by Planning and Zoning Commission and you. We discussed those things, including the open space, buffers, forest preservation, superior design, and cluster subdivision at that March 7th meeting. Looking back, we were hoping to have a workshop during the spring with the commission. However, we knew that a couple commissioners were coming off, and we waited until this time frame to have a full commission. And we are hoping to hold a workshop with the commission and council in the next couple months to talk about these ideas, as well as some of the trends and observations that they're seeing at the commission level. Now, as you're familiar, this has gained some attention from some outside entities. You all received a letter from the CDAC group last week, I believe, requesting their involvement in this development design effort. So the only reaction I could say to that letter is this will be a very public vetting of ideas, some of which may or may not gain traction from you. Some may not be part of your initiatives that you want to see move forward. So we will publicly work through that, and it'll be a very open discussion. So I welcome their input along the way. Let's dive into specifics, which is what staff is working on now so that we can roll out to you all. You've heard me talk a lot about these issues. They're all intertwined, right? These are specific county code sections, but they all are part of the development design. When a developer is walking through a subdivision, they are following these county code references. And if we adjust one, others will be affected. So we have to keep that in mind. Open space, we talked about the definition and the permanent use today in open space. As you know, today open space allows swimming pools, it allows recreational centers, it allows active and passive sections of use that perhaps maybe you don't view as correct open space, like the grass along the roads, and then the perimeter buffers around subdivisions that may or may not be enjoyed by the entire development. Something we need to look at. It's not been touched in many, many years, and just want to make sure that it's being applied correctly. More importantly, the superior design requirements listed in 11525. This is really what developers must follow when they are putting cluster subdivisions through, which is the majority of what we're seeing today, and they're following this element. And we need to talk about some of these things, including the perimeter buffer. We had a lot of public comments earlier this year about the perimeter buffers being affected by development, whereas the developer comes in, affects the entire property right to the property line, and the perimeter buffers are then planted back. I think we have certain council members that think that should be improved, and perhaps the perimeter buffer should be protected in some way.
I get feedback about that every week of my life. So,
I mean, we thought whenever, and that's something Councilman Hudson brought up like 2 years ago. So,
right.
About that, where they cut all the trees down and going to do.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So I understand what you're saying.
The public reacts poorly to that.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing, I think, that we need to focus on is the tree size and such as that to make sure they're safe.
Correct. And it's going to be a balancing act, right? Because I've also heard members of council say
Yes.
people own the trees and they have the ability to cut down those trees in certain circumstances. So
Certainly a fine line.
it is a fine line, correct. This is development design. So if you throw all of this in one bucket, that's what we're talking about. These are the ideas that we're going to bring forward to you and get your feedback and direction on. There are some other things that we've talked about over time. You've made mention during actual public hearings that you'd like to see us tackle. These are listed here, including site work requirements like the limit of disturbance line, so that that's shown clearly on the recorded plan and also out on site, so the developers know how far they can go with their equipment. a forest assessment before any work happens on the property. If you decide to develop that property, you talked about forest preservations. Maybe we need to develop incentives to allow for forest preservation. Something that we've had recently from the Soil Conservation District is the meadow option for open space, where a controlled meadow or something that has guardrails where we know what is taking place there and is approved and it's on the recorded site plan, that could be an option for open space instead of just grass cut down to low standards. We've talked recently about street standards, the county versus state maintained standards, restricting development amenities that are separated by the state roads. You all have had some concerns about clubhouses on each side of the state road and what to do about that. We've heard from the Planning and Zoning Commission and our attorneys. We're handling those on a case-by-case basis right now. Probably difficult to codify that in some kind of legal requirement, but it is something that the Commission is very much aware of. And then transfer of development rights, something we've talked about. We've had a few meetings and discussions with our attorneys. That's a big issue that's going to take a pretty heavy lift, I think. And I said back in March it would probably require us to have some kind of consultant come in and explain this to us and understand exactly what we may or may not be able to consider there. So these are the topics under that planning and zoning priority initiatives that we're working on, things that staff have been working on. We're starting to get to the point where during the workshop we can roll out specifics. And it's my hope that by the fall we're introducing ordinances and seeing those through the public hearing process. I'll touch lastly on this slide. This is the other side of the table, the issues that you guys brought forward that are sort of our standard initiatives throughout the county government, things that you just approved in this year's budget, such as airport construction, our business park expansion. You heard last week of the Delaware State Police, we're going to add new troopers to the state police complement for Sussex. EMS support, fire and BLS support, top of mind, and then our land trust and open space acquisition. We continue to work on identifying properties that we can preserve and in joint with land trust. I believe that concludes our initiatives review. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
A lot of work going on and continue to be going on. But just wanted everybody to get an update where we are, what's going on, and so the public knows we are working on these things.
Yes.
At some level.
Stay tuned for more. Thank you.
And last is your